Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're continuing on in Luke chapter 6. We're going to do the second portion of the Sabbath day passage here, and we're going to see what happens when Jesus does another miracle on the Sabbath. On another Sabbath, starting in verse 6, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them all and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. So last week we were talking about Jesus on the Sabbath, and he said he is the Lord of the Sabbath. This week we see him heal a man on the Sabbath, and what's going on in this story?
Well, it's a continuation, right? It's this idea that Jesus came and made it very clear. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not what we worship. We worship God, right? So God doesn't want anything in between us and himself. And we constantly put that, right? Whether it's our jobs, our family, but it can also be a Sabbath. There are people who put Sabbath or Sunday mornings ahead of God. And God said, like, listen, the Sabbath was made for me to work through you, right? Like, and in you. And that's super important. Again, it's another example of people having an idol. The Sabbath becomes an idol, which, by the way, you can have no other gods before me.
Absolutely. And once again, we see these religious leaders just simply not getting it. They're so caught up, like you said, in worshiping the Sabbath day, in their idol, as you just mentioned, that they miss the point of this. And Jesus makes it really clear to them. He really points out their hypocrisy and their messed up way of thinking when he says, "I ask you which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it." So while they're so focused on the Sabbath day itself, they're missing the point that Jesus is doing something good here while they're doing something evil. They're thinking malicious thoughts in their hearts. They're thinking these wrong thoughts, and Jesus is pointing that out to them. He's showing them that the Sabbath was, like you said, made for man, and that he is the one who made the Sabbath. He is the Lord of the Sabbath, and he is choosing to save a life rather than destroy it, where they are choosing to destroy a life. They don't care about this man whatsoever. They're just angry that Jesus did something because he worked on the Sabbath, as if the God of the universe isn't allowed to work on any day he wants.
Well, I mean, just think the simplicity of this. Right, the Sabbath was set aside for people, for men, to worship God and make that the priority of the day. Only we're going to tell God, you can't do anything on the Sabbath, right? So we don't want you to respond to our worship in any way, shape, or form on the Sabbath. That is super similar to today in nature. People go to church and they're going to give God their voice for a few minutes, or their words for a few minutes, or their thoughts for a few minutes. But they don't want in any way, shape, or form for God to use the day, for God to respond to them and be like, all right, hey, I'll do something with you today. They don't want to do anything. Like, again, this is scary in nature, because this makes sense to people, and it still makes sense today, right? That, again, we're setting aside time or people or places or things for God, but we're not really giving it to him to use. He can't do with it what he wants. We're going to set up the rules for it. So God has the opportunity now here to heal a man, right? And these people actually don't want him to do anything. How often is that on a Sunday morning, right? God has the opportunity to heal, to do things, to make things right and better and good, but we don't really want him to work.
Absolutely. I think that's a powerful point. It was something I was going to bring up, actually. We, in today's culture, we just go to church because it's something on our list, and we go, and like you said, we give a few minutes of praise and worship, maybe to God, maybe half-heartedly at best. We're not usually even thinking about the words we're singing, and then we listen to a sermon kind of while running through what we're going to do the rest of the day in our head and hoping that he's going to wrap up soon. We don't actually want God to do anything on the Sabbath, or what we do on a Sunday morning. We don't really come to church seeking after God to do something. We don't go anticipating, oh, God's going to meet me here today. He is going to do something amazing in this place today. Instead, we just go and we do our little thing, just like these religious leaders. They didn't want a real encounter with God. They wanted to do their tradition, the thing they just had to do and always had to do, and it kept them separated from the people. It kept them elevated where they had a place of authority over people. And that's the same thing we do today. We go to church as Christians and we like our little bit of authority. We like our little bit of prestige maybe over other people. And then we just want to go home and do our own thing.
Yeah.
Instead of actually encountering the God who's right in front of us. And who's right there waiting for us to just invite him in every Sunday. Just like the God of the universe was standing right there in their midst, and they didn't want anything to do with him. Instead, they're just caught up on their own thinking. And a heavenward thinking perspective here would have been to acknowledge what Jesus was doing and to give him the glory rather than try to take it from him as the religious leaders did here.
Yeah, well, and again, look at how this ends. Jesus calls the man, calls him into the middle, shows everybody what happens, and rather than anybody being, holy cow, the religious leaders are trying to figure out how to kill him. Oh, I've seen that in a lot of churches, a lot of moments with a lot of Christians. Rather than be excited that somebody's doing something, that somebody gets, we're caught up in how they did it. Right? And that they didn't invite us, and that they didn't ask us, and they didn't do it the right way, and they didn't get the right forms, and they didn't get the right thing. God is not beholden to your forms, your policies, your things. If he wants to heal somebody, if he wants to bless somebody, if he wants to use them, he doesn't have to ask you, excuse me, could I bless this person in your church service? He doesn't have to do that, right? But we would get angry. You interrupted the church service. You stopped things. Like, literally, if in the middle of a worship set in the average church, somebody came running down to the front and demanded that they be able to get saved, that somebody would lead them to the Lord. Do you know how many churches would get rid of that person as disruptive? Right? Disruptive. So we're worshiping God. We're telling him he's the greatest. Somebody responds to it. We say, oh, no, we don't do that here. We can't do that here. That's scary. And that's exactly what happened here. But we know that there are people who have done the same thing around here.
Yeah, we look at this passage and we think it's crazy. How are these guys responding with such hatred and anger that it says they were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus? So already here, in Luke chapter 6, we already see the plot to try to kill Jesus is already starting, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse down the line, ultimately leading to his death and then the resurrection. But we see that their hearts weren't in the right place. They were so caught up in what they wanted in their own way of thinking that they missed the opportunity right there in front of them. They missed what Jesus was doing. They didn't respond the right way. It's an incredible thing to look at the story and see how they responded. But as you said, it's the same response that so many people in churches today as Christians are having. Instead of responding to Jesus and what he's doing and praising him and worshiping him and being excited and celebrating that someone got saved or that someone was healed or whatever the case may be, we just want our little structure and we don't want God to disrupt it. We come to church and we proclaim that we're worshiping this great God, but heaven forbid he do something because it would be out of our comfort zone. It would be something that we wouldn't know what to do with, just like these religious people.
Yeah, most people are worshiping the service of the God that they're having the service for, not the God of the service. And that's what we found out right here.
Absolutely. And again, it comes back down to they wanted their authority. They wanted the power. They wanted to be in control. They didn't want to give that control up to God, who was standing there right in front of them. They had the opportunity. We have the same opportunity. Are we willing to worship Jesus, or are we going to get caught up in worshiping the things that we think are important, the traditions that we think are important, or the church religious things we think are important? We need to make sure that we are focusing on Jesus, keeping our eyes on him, and not falling into the trap of the religious leaders here in this story.
Amen.
Well, we hope you've been challenged and encouraged by this week, and that you'll join us next time as we talk about the 12 Apostles on another episode of A Fresh Perspective here on Heavenward Thinking.